Okay. So we're looking at tiled per triangle soft shadow volumes. Because we're looking at pulling them per 16 by 16 screen tile and doing some kind of a software rasterization type of approach for determining the occlusion. Resulting shadows are alias-free, work correctly with multiple casters at different distances, and even exhibit interesting real-world artifacts. Well, I think this is very interesting and promising. It's still here, production ready. Little demo. Soft shadows with variable penumbra, tile-based culling. 60 FPS, 4K, 13 million triangles. A lot of factors involved, I guess. Interesting. Say texture geometry is feasible in theory, but or possible in theory and infeasible in practice, maybe. So
wait, what is texture geometry in this case? Just like geometry with textures on it?
Or yeah, like, I'm not exactly clear on.
Or like using textures to represent geometry or something.
I'm not sure what the implications are that they're saying it's infeasible. Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess we'll see if they talk about it more. Yeah. So the goal is to determine how much a particular fragment is shadowed. So, focusing on the sun, a spherical light source with parallel light rays in our scene. Imagine sitting at the fragment, looking at the sun. You'd see a disk, which we assume has the same brightness at every point. So scene geometry could partially or fully block the circle, stopping some light from reaching the fragment. We need to determine what fraction of that light source is blocked by scene geometry. Correctly give us the shadow amount for that fragment. It's also, you can think about it, it's the amount of light it gets. Total sun occlusion. Initialize is not occluded, and then for each of the shadow casting triangles, projecting that onto the sun disk. And okay, I guess once you go through all of them, you've got some total amount of occluder. Versus doing this naively and looping through the scene triangles for every fragment is slow. Calling a lot of triangles in various stages so that each fragment only has to consider a small number. Find the sun disk space such that there's a sun center at 0, 0 as a radius of 1. You need to project all three vertices of a triangle into that space. Inputs are world space position of the three vertices, world space position of the fragment, some constants like light direction and angular radius of the sun. Transforming everything into light space where plus z points toward the sun. X and y axes are arbitrary, perpendicular to z and each other. Transform from world space to light space. The transformation matrix can be constructed on the CPU beforehand, then transforming from world to sun disk space looks like that. Just basically just okay, putting it in sun space instead of NDC or whatever. Perspective divide and uses the angular radius as field of view. Quite a bit hidden complexity here. The triangle is not necessarily a triangle after the perspective divide. Some, but not all vertices of the triangle are behind the camera. Then it gets quite complicated. Hardware rasterizers usually deal with this by clipping the triangle before a perspective divide. There's an alternative approaches called clipless rasterization. A lot of different posts on that. I guess they're ignoring that and just taking the absolute value instead. Yeah. analytically determine the exact overlap area of the disk, the triangle. I guess you partition it into a couple of different areas. Okay. Huh. Add up the overlap areas. It's incorrect. Got some roadblocks there. Let's trace into a 16 by 16 grid represented as set. Okay. It's Boolean per pixel, I guess. Really interested in the disk. Some of this grid is wasted. Oh, so when is this raster process for the occlusion actually happening?
It looks like it describes it a bit further down.
Okay, yeah, get into it later. So,
And it's software rasterizing.
okay, yeah, I guess yeah, we're just doing it in the fragment shader then. Yeah. For each triangle in the loop, simple checks, reject irrelevant triangles. Line equation for each edge, each triangle edge. Evaluate that and section. Just get some various bitwise stuff he's doing to all that. Interesting. Fixing banding issues. Because I guess small grid size of 16 by 16 causes banding artifacts. Triangle is aligned with the grid axis. So this they're talking about like here. And okay, so I guess that's like the edges of the trees or whatever. Manually rotating the grid resolves the issue. Okay. So they are. Its cost per scan line is constant, only up to the word width of 32. One could easily up the resolution in that dimension, only paying memory costs. Using all 32 bits is not easily possible. Shifting right by 32 is not well defined, and usually does not do what we want. Completely clearing the word. Only 31. Shift trick works without problems. Because they're going pretty deep on the bitwise stuff. Most per triangle shadow volume techniques using texturing is possible, at least in theory. Okay, so probably like a masking, like an alpha mask for the geometry. Or triangles, each fragment has to rasterize, has to be fairly low. Choose if there's multiple calling steps. Assuming each scene is already pre-partitioned into mesh clusters for GPU-driven rendering, and each one stores bounding volume. The two-level hierarchy, so we can call clusters and then individual triangles within the clusters. So tile-based calling similar to tile-based deferred rendering. Each 16 by 16 fragment tile of the renderer shares calling work. Probably some shared stuff with that shared memory. Truncated infinite cones as bounding volumes for the space that could be shadowed by individual triangle or mesh cluster. The angle of the cone is the angular radius of the light source. We're talking about directional lights. Truncated as the triangle cannot shadow anything that is closer to the cone's tip than the closest vertex of said triangle. Okay, so yeah, it's cone dropped off like where the geometry starts, I guess. Okay. Gather pass, its full screen is called against camera frustrum, clusters, and then triangles. Less effective than normal calling, as geometry outside the frustum can shadow stuff inside the frustum. The frustum, that's problematic, I guess, yeah. When light direction are too aligned, nothing can be called like that. Further triangles facing the light are called. Back face calling works too, but front face calling usually removes more triangles as terrain usually points towards the light. Surviving triangles, clusters, and their cones are densely packed into app buffers. And they're evaluating it. For 16 by 16 tile, render target. For each pixel, normals looked up in the G buffer and pixels not facing the light are marked as irrelevant. Not capable to be lit from that direction. The first pass. Further sky pixels with the far plane depth value are marked as irrelevant as well. Yeah, okay. There's not really geometry there. Tiles with no relevant pixels exit early. Next minimum and maximum depth value for all relevant pixels in that tile is determined from that bounding volume contained containing the 3D positions of all relevant pixels on this tile can be computed depending on the depth range, either using a sphere or a capsule shape, which has different radiuses, just like a also seen that like a called like a capped cone kind of thing. Output of the gather step is then called against the bounding volume. Performing the two steps again, first calling mesh clusters, then individual triangles. Third of the work group deals with a different cluster or triangle, parallelizing the calling. That steps, the surviving clusters and triangles are stored in a work group shared memory buffer. So at the end, each work group has a list of triangles, potentially shadowing pixels within that tile. Okay. The rasterization step, described in the previous chapter. Well-known problem with this tiled approach is depth discontinuity, lead to bad culling. Shared memory buffer has relatively limited size, can only store a few thousand triangles. So it's quickly reached for tiles with large depth ranges, especially during the sunrise or sunset. I guess that's grazing angles, where your sun would be kind of rays from the sun would be perpendicular, parallel to the ground, basically approaching parallel. In most cases, draw a checkerboard pattern for debugging. Under the half C approach, where the initial depth range is split into half, and the exact bounds of the two halves not exactly sure what that's referring to. Coloring's far from perfect. Some different searches, I guess. Relatively easy to render, relatively easy to implement, and is based on 2 widely used techniques. Cone Fresnel intersection test. Really. Um, Bounding cone for a triangle. Interesting. I guess their performance numbers. Pretty cool. A lot of that depends on the view and sun elevation. Sunsets and sunrises are very demanding. Many tiles run at their triangle limit. Does that make sense? Because it's if it was coming in at a grazing, it will be covering a lot of geometry with the potential occluders there. The shadow from distant objects covers a large part of the screen. Rasterization routine has to run very often. Important notes: mesh shaders or mesh clusters currently have widely varying size, which is bad. We utilize all the GPU. Second, no LOD system. And highest resolution mesh is also used for shadow calculations. Okay. Cool.
Pretty interesting thing to go through, because it's a real, hey, I tried to do something and this is what I came up with. Not trying to implement an existing thing, but coming up with their own solution to soft shadows.
Yeah, look at trying new things.
It was interesting they mentioned that they didn't have LODs, and I'm thinking, yeah, you have a very low poly scene to begin with, but you know, if you have a huge amount of mesh detail at a very distant scale, that could be easily a source of a lot of your, you know, triangle budget exhaustion. So it'd be interesting to know how much that affects things. And yeah, also the fact that it doesn't scale well with the number of triangles, because it you know, sunrise and sunset, you get long shadows, and that is a problem.
Yeah, I guess, that makes sense. The mentioning that is because you go from potentially, it's basically just one layer of geometry if you're looking at it straight down or whatever, to something where you're basically containing a very large slice of the scene there.
Yeah. Well, interesting article nonetheless.
Yeah.
I always like seeing software rasterization being useful.
Yeah. I was looking through the article, and if you don't zoom in on the pictures, it's a bit hard to tell where some of the visual artifacts are.
Yeah, it looks great.
The aliasing. The one spot where you mentioned aliasing, I didn't even really notice it super.
So, like, the first one is determine occlusion via rasterization, sum of individual contributions versus rasterized on a 16 by 6. Wait, is that one? Yeah, when he tried to analytically determine the exact overlap, and it turns out it was a bit over 1. I had to put that to full screen, and then I could see that there is, like, in the humanoid shadow, there was a bit of weird banding where you could tell that it should be a little darker than it was. But like I had to do full screen, and it, similar to the other picture where it was fixed banding. If you do it on a edge-aligned grid, when you zoom in, you can see that there's a very strong banding, color banding, all from the in the soft shadow, from shadow to completely visible, just like GIF compression, where you get that color banding, but this time it's just value, not color.
Right, right, because you only got a certain number of levels there.
Yeah. Or, well, it's just there's no difference in the color, it's just how bright it is. So the banding is more clear. Like, I'm just gonna share this window because it makes just to point it out exactly. Like, yeah, the banding's across this.
Mm.
And this is the good one, and it's like there's still a little bit of banding, but it's not as pronounced. At least I think there's still a little bit of banding, but that's probably due to the pixel grid rather than the other issues. Still,
It's hard to say, yeah.
I think that was.
And the videos in particular too, it's kind of hard to tell how much of that is the encoding.
Oh yeah, that's always fun game to play. Okay, well I think I'm gonna end the recording. Nice, short and sweet.